Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Lead Analyst Logan Mohtashami to talk about the positive housing data we're seeing this week, including purchase apps and new home sales. Things are looking up. Logan, welcome back to the podcast.
It is wonderful to be here, and both of us are traveling. You're in San Diego, and I am in Phoenix, and we just had a cocktail economic nerdy event, and it was at I think Wrigley's Mansion. They had candles, and I had my whole Dracula outfit on, and it was a very good vibe, getting ready for Halloween coming up soon.
It wasn't a literal, let's just be clear, it wasn't a literal Dracula outfit. It's just that you have a shiny shirt that everyone thinks looks like your vampire.
I know people say I look like Bram Stoker's Dracula because, by the time when my gel runs out, my hair just goes into Bram Stoker mode. And then the color shirt is, the same kind of shirt he had. So, people went there right away.
Okay, well, I'm at the National Reverse Mortgage Lenders Association, and we had a rooftop, San Diego rooftop bar party. So that's what I was doing.
You beat me on that one probably.
I did. It was awesome. Okay, well, let's talk. Today is great. We have some positive housing data. So let's talk about what that looks like.
Yeah, so when we talk about positive trending data, we always want to take a trend. And earlier in the year, even though purchase application data doesn't have big volume to the downside or the upside, the weekly data when mortgage rates were heading toward 7.5% because the Fed needs confidence. We need confidence, And we had 14 negative prints on the week to week. We only had 2 positive prints on the week to week, and we had 2 flat prints. And we had negative year-over-year data every week. And we pretty much have negative year-over-year data for almost like 2 years. But as mortgage rates started to fall, and I think the difference between this year than 2022 and 2023 is that mortgage rates started to fall in June. The purchase application data is very seasonal. Usually I just count it really from the second week of January to the first week of May, and then after May, total volumes tend to fall. So rates fell right at the kind of the seasonal volume downturn, but we have 16 weeks of data, and it is 11 positive weekly prints, 5 straight weeks of positive. That's the highest winning streak of this year. We've only had 5 negative prints, and for the first time since 2022, we've had positive year-over-year growth in purchase application data. And for those that know, I've been trying to stress this for about 4 or 5 weeks. When we get positive year-over-year data, let's be a little bit mindful. Last year at this time, the Fed, did their little thing, and the 10-year yield went up to 5%, and mortgage rates went to 8%. And they're like, oh my God, what's happening? We don't understand, So we had a lot of weakness in the data. So we have a very low comp, but that's a material change. I'm still seeing people on Twitter and media say there's no difference. There is a difference. You just have to really look at the data and compare it to what it used to be when mortgage rates were heading towards 7.5%. And now that they're, kind of in the low 6s, it's a difference. It's not a V-shaped recovery like we saw during COVID, but it's good enough. It's good enough to keep things going. And we see it in our tracker data. Last week's tracker data was probably the chef kiss best week of the year. The only thing I could find wrong with last week's data was that the pricing was a little bit too strong for my liking. But we saw inventory grow. Inventory actually hit a little bit above 11,000. And we didn't need higher rates for that. New listings data grew, but the weekly pending contracts, one of the things I try to highlight is that our weekly pending contracts is a little bit more stable than the NAR's pending home sales. And the NAR's pending home sales gets very wild up and down. We saw positive inventory growth, positive demand growth. And if the weekly pending contracts keep on growing, and like the forward-looking data, it's going to go through the 2022 levels there too. So it's a material change from what we saw earlier in the year. And I this is the best week. Like, I could not be any more happy with housing data. And we clearly see that rates getting toward the high 6s and above 7s is, even for the builders, is problematic. We saw that in the new home sales data when rates were going up. The sales were going down. The builders were not hiring anything. Permits were at recession levels. Starts were at. But even the new home sales report today that I was anticipating revisions to last month. I even wrote it in the article. I said, this is not my first rodeo. When you have a big print like that, you usually get some revisions to the downside. It was revised up.
Wow.
It was revised higher. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, this week is just like hitting it on all parks. So it showed a month-to-month decline because the revisions were higher, but we're at 10% year-over-year growth. And with permits rising now, single-family permits, and then also the builder survey, which is tilted to more smaller builders for 3 months in a row, the forward-looking data gets better. So this is as good as you can get, considering the Fed is still restrictive policy. Sarah, they even say it, we're still restrictive. And I think one of the economic data points that we saw this week is that the conference boards looking for jobs, their labor market is deteriorating fast now. So what's the theme?
Old and slow?
Old and slow and paper, rock, scissors,
Oh, yes.
Labor over inflation. And, the bond market got well ahead of the Federal Reserve, and the bond market was right this time. So it'll be more interesting to see if the Fed starts to make comments on data lines, because they've said, well, old models don't work right now, so we call people up. And if they're calling people up, it should be a little bit more problematic. And I think hopefully, if I'm right, they feel a lot more easy about cutting rates or talking dovish now that everyone could see, hey guys, whatever you want to say, the labor market is strong. It's the internals of the data lines you guys track are not showing that anymore. So hopefully, we had a baby pivot recently. Hopefully there could be a full pivot. I still think they need to see a little bit more labor deterioration. But considering everything the housing market has been through, and especially the mortgage industry, refinances are picking up, this is as good as you could hope by having a Federal Reserve that still deems that they need restrictive policy. I think Bowman came out and said, if we cut rates, oh my God, demand might pick up. Oh, we might have a growing economy, or things might get better.
Babies. Okay, so I think this can be confusing. It's one of the reasons I love that you do the tracker, because it's like a tale of two economies. You put the housing market, right, into a recession in 2022, and now we're talking about positive housing data at the same time that we're talking about that we're having, labor data get weaker, and other, recessionary things happening, so that the Fed feels like they can be, less restrictive than they had been. So it can be confusing, because if you just listen to, news about the macroeconomy, you're like, oh, this is one thing. But then you look into the internals of the housing data, it's something else. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
So there's an old saying that the housing cycle is the business cycle. People say housing leads you into a recession and then leads you out. Well, we've had a very unique cycle. The existing home sales market has been in a recession since June 16th, 5:31 p.m. because back then it was like, okay, volumes are about to crash and incomes are about to crash, transfers of commission, these things. This doesn't mean the economy is going into recession. I think that was the mistake. The new home sales market, sales were crashing back then. Single family permits were falling, but multifamily permits were rising, right? So what you traditionally see in an economic recession is permits fall for 5 units, single family, housing starts fall, and then residential construction workers lose their jobs. That's the one that tags to the economic recession. So existing home sales are just at very low levels. And I try to explain this. I believe the Fed looks at it a little bit different like everybody else. I mean, the Fed sees, well, total home sales are near 5 million. And well, the peak in the last decade was near 6 million. So there's a million marginal home buyers lost. That buyer pool, it's still in there. And because of that, they don't say anything like to help the housing market. They just kind of leave it at bay. So you can have the existing home sales market be in a recession since June of 2022, but not have the U.S. economy be in a recession, because the housing sectors that impact the economy, construction jobs. Imagine if we had 5 months of construction workers losing their jobs each. Guess what? What does that mean? Jobless claims goes up. And then the Fed's like, oh no, we didn't see this coming. So that's the difference between the housing cycle and what it means to the economy, and the difference between the existing home sales market and the new home sales market.
Okay, so if you're sitting out there, you're an LO, you're in real estate, you're in title, you're just in the housing market, and you hear you talking about like this is positive housing data. So purchase apps look out what, 30 to 90 days? So like when do we start seeing this?
Yeah, 30. Well, we already see it in our pending contracts data, but we also have to remember rates started to fall in June. And this is why we created the tracker, because by the time everyone else sees it in the existing home sales, we're like months ahead of everyone. This is kind of why we say, Case-Shiller hit another all-time high. Sarah Wheeler, the Case-Shiller index hit another all-time high in home prices, and we were kind of starting from March saying, okay, inventory is growing, price cut percentage, the price growth is going to cool down. We're starting to see the price growth cool down on the Case-Shiller. It doesn't mean prices are falling. The growth rate is slowing down. And then this second half, the seasonal slowdown happens. But we try to get ahead of everything so people look current and out. You don't want to wait for like monthly sales reports. That's so Fed. That's so old and slow. So those that were able to read the tracker, they could kind of see that, we connect the dots between the purchase application data, the pending sales, the active inventory, the price cut percentages. And like I said, the only knock that I have in the tracker data is that the new listings prices accelerated way too strong for my liking. I'm hoping that gets a retracement back. And the price cut percentages starting to slow down. We're almost at the kind of seasonal period, but it's a demand story, and we're not at the seasonal time where demand takes off with purchase apps, but considering everything we had earlier in the year,
yes,
right? This is as good as you could hope for with rates being above 6% still. It's like my belief has always been the same. The builders have shown you how to grow sales, but they're in a sub 6% mortgage market world. The existing home sales has not had that in scale. If mortgage rates are 4.5% to 5.5%, you can grow sales from these very low levels. The builders have shown the way. The existing inventory is up, right? There's more supply. We had 2 million more home sales, when inventory was lower, right? Because remember, most sellers are buyers. We finish transactions faster these days. So it doesn't, by the time that's done, they don't count in the active inventory because the homes are gone. So considering everything, this is probably the best week that I've seen. And we're talking Wednesday morning, so we just saw the purchase application data, and we just saw the new home sales data. So considering how rough the start of the year was, because the Fed needed confidence. Do you realize that the labor market was deteriorating that entire time when the Fed said we needed confidence? We've always talked about that in our labor models. They're like, you know what? The job growth should be lower, but it's not there. We'll wait for revisions, and then here it is. And now they're like, oh, well, maybe we got to do 50. More of them are like, oh, wait, well, we got to get down to neutral. So all this discussion with the Fed is still based on tight policy, right? They're nowhere near neutral, and they're nowhere near accommodative. But for now, considering that there's been nothing said or done for the housing market, this is as best you could hope for.
So looking at the inventory data and looking at, anytime, so one of the surprising things about the tracker this last week is you had mortgage rates go down and inventory go up. And those two things you're just so people who aren't watching, you're doing chef's kiss.
Chef's kiss. I'm like, this is you cannot get, it's interesting. I had this a talk last night with a Phoenix agent. A lot of people don't know the history of home prices and inventory, and we've had decades and decades of inventory actually rising with demand actually picking up. We saw that in the early 80s. We saw that in 2000 to 2005. So you can have rising demand and rising inventory at times. It's not common these days because qualified mortgage, but when you do see it, it's beautiful considering that, we're still below the historical averages, because I've always expressed this. if you're a seller, most likely you're a buyer. Not all sellers are buyers, but in that context, you're putting the home on the market and you feel comfortable where rates are. This is why I want the new listings data to grow. Like, I'm still so mad I didn't get my minimum new listings data at 80K, but it grew this last week too, and inventory grew. So because like Santa Claus came to me already. That tracker that week was just like perfect. So you get people in a more comfortable spot. It's a different situation. Let's say if there's a job loss recession and then the new listings data starts to tick off, because you are implying that some of these sellers are not going to be buyers, right? Some of these sellers have to sell their homes because they lost their job and they can't. You're not getting another house without employment. We're not there yet. People get fired every single week. That's not common. Jobless claims don't go to zero. But when you start to pick up on jobless claims and job losses come, then you can see, we're going to have a whole different housing discussion when that occurs, but we're not there yet. So the fact that this last week we saw active inventory grow and it still stayed in the normal range, that's why I'm like, oh, heaven. And then new listings data grew. The only thing I didn't like was the pricing was a little bit too sharp, but considering everything else, it's positive because we need to get something back to normal. We need to get normal inventory level. We have 4.2 months of supply. For me, that's perfectly fine. I would argue it's a balanced market. And now when I talk about months of supply being 4 months and higher, I'm not a 6-month supply person. But when I look at months of supply, I look at it and incorporate my affordability index into it. So 4.2 months of supply with the affordability of the last decade is different than now, right? Because it's more expensive to buy a home now. So you can allow the inventory to grow. People have more choices. You start to get back to a normal housing market because I have a much different take than everybody. Housing was unhealthy in 2021. It was savagely unhealthy in 2022. We were team higher rates to get inventory growing, to get price growth to cool down. And we're starting to see some of the benefits of time, time working its way, trying to get back to some kind of normal housing market.
I think that those national numbers are so important to track what we do, and that's great. I know if you're in last week we were in New Hampshire, and their inventory is terrible. Like it's nowhere near normal. It's nowhere near 4 months. So that's the hard part is every market is local.
Every market is local. Of course, Texas, Florida, and New Orleans are the big drivers of inventory. There's specific issues with some of the areas in those states. But, there was one question yesterday or last night, and people go, well, how can home prices keep on going up? I don't see wages growing up. And I said, okay, explain to me, how do we have 5 million total home sales? Explain to me how the millennials are the biggest home buyers in America today. No answer. Explain to me how prices keep on rising. No answer. By the way, so many people have, the fact that we show that 1942 to 2024 home price chart, people are just amazed by that. But what I always say that dual household incomes in America, that's America's muscle. 1/3 of the society are never going to be homeowners. Service sector workers, very low pay, unless they're part of a dual household income. But when you put dual household incomes together, and then you think about it in this light, the baby boomers are down to 17 million working left. The Gen Z is about to surpass them in a bigger way. The millennials passed them back in 2015.
Don't leave us out, Logan. Don't leave out Gen X.
No, Gen X. Yeah, Gen X. Nobody cares about us, so we're a little bit under the millennials right now. We're a much smaller demographic patch than them. But when you think about how are you getting 5 million total home sales, there's a cash buyer percentage into that. Dual household incomes together, like I always explain it this way, the NAR says you need $110,000 to buy a home in America with mortgage rates between 6 to 8%, something of that nature. One person makes 90, the other person makes 70. There you go. So then you think about the sellers, right? We always do the loan to value. The loan to values in America is under 50%. 42% of homes have no mortgage. So those sellers, the older sellers, when they sell their house, they got a lot of equity. So the affordability crisis issue doesn't impact them. So here we are. It's after November 9th, 2022, we have not had a significant crash lower than under 4 million on the monthly plates. Then new home sales are growing, right? New home sales are much higher than they were at the lowest levels of the housing bubble crash. So that's how you could grow sales. And then as time goes on, mortgage rates fall a little bit, wages grow, household formation. This is how you grow sales. We know this because the 1980s, early 1980s, when affordability was worse, we had more inventory, a recession, nobody could buy homes, and all of a sudden rates went 2.5% lower. I mean, it was a spike too back then. I do these multi-decade existing home sales chart, and you see a spike up in sales in the worst affordability time in history. And just always think about it in that way, that dual household incomes actually offset a lot of the housing inflation. And that's how you have near 5 million total home sales. This is why new home sales are growing again. This is why purchase application data is picking up. It's not a big volume curve right now, neither lower or higher, but the more choices we get, the price growth cools down, prices escalating out of control, bad, no good, right? So the growth rate slowing down. 2024 is what I wanted 2023 to be, right? And we couldn't get it. New listings data was too low. We couldn't get the inventory growth, but until the second half of the year. But here, it's beautiful to watch. It is absolutely priceless.
Okay, so just to clarify, unlike the 1980s, you don't see a spike coming for us in home sales.
Well, you need to get mortgage rates between 4 to 6% and stay there.
Okay.
Right? If you want to grow sales, the builders have shown you the way, right? They've said, hey, listen, we're still growing sales, but we're under. This is why I say at some point, the Federal Reserve does make it, because I hear this argument of where there's mortgage rates, lower mortgage rates are not boosting existing home sales. Well, because you still have an affordability issue. You still have that core buyer in there. But if you want to grow sales, the 80s have shown you the way. Mortgage rates went 2.5% lower. Plus, from the kind of high level range back then, our high level range is 6 to 8%. We've been here now since 2022, and only now we're starting to see a little bit of, my God, I can't really say this, but we've been year-over-year growth in purchase apps since 2022, low bar. That's how you get sales to grow, and the builders have shown us the way. Remember, considering that we're at 4 million roughly around here, we are at record low levels of sales, but we have a lot more people. Right? This is why I always say it's the third calendar year of the lowest home sales ever. And we don't crash below this, but to get growth, you need lower mortgage rates, household formation, wages to grow, time. But the key thing was that we had to slow the price growth down, right? And the only way you do that is, what's the best way to deal with inflation, Sarah?
More supply.
Supply, right? Because that house is there, right? Demand destruction is a very, very short-term fix, but it tends not to do anything on the supply side. But here, supply is growing, days on market. These are things to try to get back to something normal.
I love it. Positive housing data, a more normal market. All of these things are good for us, for the industry, for the country. So,
yeah, and refinances are picking up now. Refinances in 2023 at this time, like the all-time low. So when we see these really big year-over-year refinance pickups, just remember, boy, we were heading toward 8%. Not a lot of people were doing rate into refinances. But if you look at the refinance index out for a very long period, you can see that we were literally at all-time lows. So always take the year-over-year data. Because we always make fun of the foreclosure people. They say, oh, foreclosures are up 700%. Home prices are going to crash. Sarah, we have so many loser guys. That's a problem. We have men who just literally wake up and just want to doom port and just they can't get out of it. Like I was telling people on Twitter, I said, if I ever become one of these people, please block me. Don't ever listen to me. And just remember the old Logan, but not this. This, I mean, you live once in your life, and this is how you're going to be remembered, and your children and your grandchildren are going to remember you. Think, oh, really, like just go to Russia, go to China. What are you doing here? We're ball players here in America. We win. But For housing, we're getting some growth, we're getting some refinances, which means that the rate and term refinances, especially people that had, maybe 7.5% to 8.5% mortgage rates. Now, what's happening with mortgage rates? They're not going lower anymore, right? Since the Fed meeting. So we've talked about that in the podcast two days ago. So remember, the bond market got well ahead of the Federal Reserve. And to get that next stage lower, this is why we try to talk about this. You're going to need weaker economic data, better spreads, or a dovish Fed. We haven't had weaker economic data in big scale terms. We did have that really bad conference labor report. But to get that next leg lower, could you imagine if the Fed actually really pivots? Like, they have that card waiting anytime they want to use it. They're just slow. They're grouchy. Slow people. Imagine that happens and things get better. So we haven't even used that card yet. But if it happens, now you guys all see the framework of what could possibly be the case. And again, the builders have shown you this the last 2 years by their being able to grow sales from the lows of 2022.
I love ending on a positive note. I love we're win, 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 win.
I know it's been so long. I'm looking at this. I'm like, wow, this is actually for the first time. I could connect the dots. I could show. Remember, if I can't show you this, then it's no good. It's a theory, right? You need to show people the data. And with the tracker article, and I trust everyone. If you read the tracker article, you're going to be months ahead of everyone. You're already 20 years ahead of Uncle Dave. But it's designed to give people a forward look at, and here we are again, Case-Shiller Index, all-time highs in prices. We are trying to explain to you why this is happening. So you don't listen to the doom porn people on YouTube or Twitter or Instagram. And part of dealing or talking to a lot of the Phoenix agents, they say, this person says this. I say, this person's trash. That person's really trash. And oh my God, no. Don't listen to that person. Geez. So believe in people that have forecasts and economic models. This is how it's worked since the Peloponnesian War. People like us, scientists, data scientists, math people, the history of humanity, people hate our guts because we live in facts. But there's a group of people out there that, everything's coming to an end and everything, right? And there's always going to be demagogues, especially in America. And just remember, when they pass on to the afterlife, these cowards will not go to Canada or Mexico or Russia or China or the Nordic countries. They will be buried here because it was all a lie. If things were that bad, they would have gone, but no, they're just going to sit here and cry like a bunch of babies.
Love it. Okay, we got our Peloponnesian War reference in there. I'm really happy to hear that.
Hey, the chart daddy brings it. We're going to Vegas next. The chart daddy in Vegas. But, be the detective, not the troll. Okay. Economics done right should be terribly boring. It's not designed to be this hot, fun, sexy thing, but we can guide you, but you need to be the detective. Look at the data.
I think that was like four of your catchphrases in a row. It was awesome. Okay, Logan, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate you.
Pleasure.